Ben was gone when I finally emerged from his guest suite the next morning. He'd left word with Omu that he was going to the settlement's administration building and would be busy seeing to the temporary reallocation of Martian personnel and industry. I ate breakfast alone in Ben's kitchen unit, as although Riho was awake, she had already eaten and was now in the upper dome chamber playing her tenor bassoon. The music was a melodramatic counterpoint to the deep thoughts I still had swirling in my head from the previous night's disaster. "Oh, Moo, how is everyone?" "Uxe, Hannah, Alec, and Deja are all well," the android replied, knowing whom I was concerned about the most. After a virtually productive but physically uneventful trip, Ukes arrived on Elon 2 hours ago and is now asleep. Hannah and Alec are still at work assisting with the last rescues of trapped but uninjured humans. Both have had short rest periods throughout the night and are in good spirits. Deja is now resting after performing medical triage all night. She is scheduled to return to Mars sometime tomorrow. "What's the final tally?" I asked next. 37 injured, 14 severely enough to require reshelling or extensive biosuspension repair. 8 deceased, Omu reported without pause. "How much time?" I asked softly. "Those killed have mostly adhered to the mandatory quarterly mine data backup schedule. The average duration of lost uniqueness was 7 weeks, the android reported. The greatest individual loss was 13 weeks. I paused eating and rubbed my forehead. That was more than a year of living experience lost when combined. Bad, but not that bad. Note that while on Phobos, all activities have been fully recorded. Those who suffered existential losses will have the ability to review those time periods extensively if they wish," Omu explained. "In addition, individual dream programs have been created for each victim using the recorded data. These programs will be integrated into the recovery process. Both methods of existential recovery would help." "What about the offensive?" "Surprisingly, humanity was rather fortunate. Praxia estimates that the Phobos complex can be fully restored in less than 3 months. Partial capacity may be available in less than 2. "Oh? How can we manage that?" I exclaimed. The destroyed facility had been huge, and nearly all of its volume had been filed with complicated wizardry. When the complex had originally become operational, the underground manufactories continued fabricating spare components against just such an eventuality. Also, the use of shunting wormholes will eliminate a substantial amount of the original physical infrastructure. Finally, we were very lucky in that the power production dynamos were spared. 2 to 3 months. That was far sooner than I'd imagined. In fact, it would give the antimatter warhead improvement team more time to perfect the enhanced suspension fields. It also dawned on me that the pause might be costly to the enemy as well. They would likely remain at their highest alert levels, which would consume both finite energy and resources. Maybe due to the pause, they might conclude that whatever had attacked them had exhausted its offensive capability and had given up. Because they did not know about wormhole technology, they would have to assume that the interstellar attacks had been centuries in the making. "Omu, how does the AI Advisory Council think the assemblage perceived the second frontal impactor attack attempt?" "If you are asking if the enemy still considers the frontal impactors as merely random space debris, the odds are very low at only 8%. Those odds do increase as time goes on and no further attacks are launched, but only up to 12%. It is just too likely that the enemy spotted the maneuvering booster stage. So the enemy now surely thinks they were purposely attacked both from the rear and from the front." I wondered how they took that news. Could an alien AI panic? Well, we knew that subterfuge wouldn't last long. At least we could now freely use active radar to assist in any future attacks if we wished. The music from the upper chamber came to a close and Riho soon joined me in the kitchen. She looked at me with a strange expression, almost apprehensive. "What will you do now, John?" she asked. "That's a good question, Zeotile. I suppose I should log into virtual and face the music sooner rather than later. Get the controversy over with quickly and move forward," I replied. Omu spoke. "John, Naomi reports that sufficient energy reserves are now available to transport you back to the Earth as you wish. We urge you to utilize this transport. Sometime on your beach or some other low-population natural area would undoubtedly improve your mental outlook." "How could I run away with everything still so unsettled here?" I asked. You would still be able to make virtual appearances, Jon, Riho said. No one need know you have relocated to Earth. I frowned and shook my head stubbornly. No, I would not run away. Elon 2nd Space Station, Thursday, December 21st, 3116, 8 days later. It was a rare, quiet, and uneventful evening. I was in my apartment relaxing on the sofa after finishing supper. I had almost fallen asleep, Riho's music lulling me into closing my eyes as I lay there deep in thought. Despite having the evening free, I'd spent much of it mentally rehashing the recent events and discussions which had taken place since the Phobos accident. I'd remained on Mars for another 3 days before deciding to make my way back up to orbit and my apartment on the space station. Most of those 3 days were spent in virtual meetings with various conscientia action groups. Some of the forums were sponsored by the pro-war side and had been understanding and supportive, while others led by the opposition had been far harsher. Did my presence help? I wasn't sure, as people could be so stubborn, me included. We would have to judge the results of the public relations damage mitigation effort moving forward. There had been a few positive outcomes from the accident, and I had pushed them hard on the forums. The main benefit being that we'd learned many new details about the enemy's forward weaponry and shields. We'd also learned from the damage we'd suffered on Phobos. Neo-Truffles and Stellix AIs had jointly developed a rapid circuit breaker energy shunt for the exotic matter compensation coils. The new energy dumps would allow the nearly instantaneous shutdown of the big wormhole if forward-deployed sensors detected objects about to collide with the terminus. Moving forward, our new standard operating procedure would be that anytime we formed a wormhole with fractional light speed and spatial velocity compensation, we'd use Sarissa to quickly deploy bumper sensors ahead, which would hopefully warn us in time to prevent another Phobos-like backwash event. I had refrained from admitting to the outraged public that the AIs had already been working on such a warning system before the Phobos accident. Instead, I let them assume the breakthrough had come about because of the accident. It was a bit of ugly semantics, but at least it bought the war effort, and me personally, breathing room. Seeing the enemy's forward energy weapon in action had also brought about a minor breakthrough in our ability to handle antimatter in particle form. Specifically, on how the assemblage had fired an antimatter particle lance without the charged particles looping around and being drawn back to their ship. What had been theorized and quickly proven in the lab was that the assemblage neutralized the charge from the anti-particles by grounding them, so to speak, into subspace energy storage pockets, similar to the ESUs we used as batteries. The enemy was then able to later use the stripped positrons as gamma inducers to power coherent beams of energy. These beams were capable of being modulated to provide interstellar range communications. There had also been extensive discussions over the damage we had caused to the Ark's asteroid-like bow. We'd apparently struck it twice with our impactors, but both times unfortunately missing the enemy's main energy projector. 20 hours after our failed attack, Sarissa was activated for a brief period to poke through its sensor cluster. For safety, the wormhole was kept over 60,000 kilometers offset of the enemy's course, and the duration of the wormhole was limited to less than 20 seconds. Still, in that short time, the powerful telescope in the sensor's head was able to image the two new craters in the nose of the Ark. Both showed signs of heavy construction activity, with energy emissions indicating plasma welding. A large spreading halo of debris was also detected around the nose of the Ark. Just before wormhole closure, the sensor actively scanned the debris cloud with a spectral laser, which confirmed our previous readings of iron and nickel. We also detected a large percentage of silicates, enough to fuel speculation that the enemy had sought a heightened electrical resistivity in the metallic makeup of its shielding structures. Unfortunately, what the sensor did not observe were any burning plasma fires, the venting of important gases, or, even better, precious bodily fluids. No, it looked like we damaged just large, unimportant masses of fused metal. This reinforced the speculation that the bulbous ends of the Ark were indeed just debris protection as theorized. The focus of any future attacks would be on the central tapering stalk section of the Ark. Once I'd left the Martian surface, I drastically curtailed my conscientia appearances. Instead, I spent more time working with Hannah and Alec. In addition to slowly continuing the work to complete Higgins, We also assisted the zero-G autofabs as they produced the more delicate electronic assemblies for the Phobos repair effort. While we worked, we also discussed the fledgling raidership idea. There was less of a sense of urgency for both projects, as each depended upon the big wormhole complex being rebuilt and operational. Also, Uxa was too busy managing the rebuild efforts to partake in our planning sessions. She was also busy with research into the new antimatter technology we'd observed on the Ark. Even the AIs were less responsive lately, as their capacity was being taxed handling the swarms of mobile units active on the Martian moon. Because every one of the Martian orbital fabricators was busy rebuilding Phobos's infrastructure, we were seriously contemplating starting construction on our Raider prototype at the Earth or lunar orbital shipyards. They had the capacity and we had the time to transship the completed hardware to Mars. Adding to that idea was the fact that Earth and Mars would be in favorable intra-system shipping alignments for the next 3 months. Since we had time, I was reconsidering taking Naomi and Omu's advice and returning to Earth for a short vacation. Riho was pushing for our return as well as she wanted to go back to Earth, where far more humans lived who were interested in her species. I suspected that with an easier lifestyle, the Earthbound had more free time than the Martians to devote to learning esoteric pursuits like Hemru history and culture. Because I had not yet agreed, she'd gone so far as to schedule transport for herself only. Her slot on the overburdened lunar transport network was not for 10 days, so I still had time to agree to go to Earth with her. If I did, we would utilize Naomi's private wormhole. I'd been surprised when she'd scheduled herself to go without me, but I was still feeling enough melancholy over Phobos that any upset washed right over me. Riho's background music went silent in the middle of her composition. This was odd, as she seldom made a mistake drastic enough to cause her to restart. I was about to open my eyes to inquire what was wrong when Omu spoke. "John, please wake." "I'm awake," I croaked, sounding as if I were coming awake. Maybe I had drifted off. The android went on softly. "There has been an accident at the Warhead Research Project. Beatrice Aro Ioveanu, along with 3 others of her team, has been killed." "What happened?" I asked after the android paused. "An antimatter containment field failure occurred." What the hell was she doing near antimatter?" I burst out, interrupting the android's likely explanation. I quickly apologized. Omu continued as if I had not spoken. "No antimatter was present. It was a wormhole failure. A shunting wormhole was being used to project electromagnetic interference into an active stabilization field. The field scrambled one of the shunting wormhole's controllers, shifting its terminus, which was located in Miss Ioveanu's laboratory. The moving portal terminus quickly traversed partially through the 4 humans, killing them instantly. Christ, I rubbed my face, coming fully awake. Did they suffer?" "Death would have been nearly instantaneous," Omu explained. "When was her last backup?" I asked, not wanting to think about Omu's evading answer. "I am sorry to report that Miss Ioveanu's last mind data backup occurred more than 5 months ago," the android said somberly. "That damned stubborn woman. She was always saying that she was too busy and didn't need to worry about backups when she was not currently working on anything dangerous. Is she being reshelled?" I said. "Yes, fortunately over a decade ago, Miss Ioveanu had commissioned the growing of a clone replacement shell. Since reaching adulthood last year, this shell has been waiting in biosuspension storage at the Aegean Biologic Fabrication Facility. The replacement shell is currently being revived, and soon Miss Ioveanu's most recent mind recording will be implanted. She will be fully awake and aware in 2 days. Beatrice would be very confused when she awoke in the new shell. She would also likely be very upset when she learned about the lost 5 months. Will she be revived in Greece or returned to Luna before final activation?" "In Greece. Her last mind data recording was sent to a data repository near the Biologic Fabrication Facility soon after it was taken. Omu, I want transport for our group to Earth as quickly as possible. I'd like to stay on heels tonight and then take an electrojet to Greece sometime tomorrow before she is awake. Keep my arrival secret." "Of course, John," the android replied. "The first wormhole transference to High Castle Space Station will be ready in 3 minutes. It will take 12 minutes between transfers to restore sufficient wormhole energies. Riho went to gather the few possessions we preferred to take with us. I trusted her to gather my few items, as I was still preoccupied thinking about my dead friend. This war had moved beyond the drawing of first blood for both sides. Friday, January 12th, 3117, 3 weeks later. North American continent, Earth. John's acreage. The small fluorescent bobber floating in the middle of the 16-centimeter diameter hole in the translucent ice plunged quickly below the water's surface before slowly rising again to the surface. I set aside my jigging rod and watched the bobber closely, ready to grab that rod if a fish took it again. Had the movement been a nibble? Or had the large minnow I was using as bait found a sudden burst of energy? The bobber twitched again, but this time it was the normal slight motion of the swimming live bait fish. I did notice that the bobber was being pulled toward the side of the hole. Was something down there near the bottom scaring the bait? I watched it like a hawk for a long minute, but it stopped twitching, not even a shiver. I glanced at Omu, who was kneeling behind me near a third smaller hole in the ice. The android was operating a small submerged sensor drone. Despite the odds-improving technology, I'd ordered the android to not report fish locations unless I asked. I wanted to retain the element of surprise. For a moment, I debated requesting that the sensor data be relayed to my iris. But no, I'd keep fishing the old-fashioned way, at least for now. Maybe in an hour, if I had still not caught anything, I'd change my mind. Still, the android's sensor data could be useful in other ways. "Omu, is my bait still intact?" I asked. "Yes, John. The bait specimen is fully intact and functional," Omu reported. I caught her watching me with a smirk, as if she expected me to cave into my impulses and ask for more data. My stubbornness was strong enough for me to resist the temptation. I picked up my jigging rod and began to twitch life into the shiny metal lure I left dangling almost 4 meters below me. Omu quickly stood and moved to the domed ice shack's sealed flap. "The ambassador is attempting to make her way out onto the ice. I will go assist her." I covered my eyes with my gloved left hand before the android opened the flap and let in the bright outdoor sunlight. I'd not bothered to set my irises to fast dimming and wanted to preserve my low-light vision to better see into the crystal-clear waters below. The android exited the shack quickly. The shack's flap was open for just seconds, but I still felt the frigid blast of air come rushing in. I didn't bother to find my stowed parka, as the small battery-powered cube heater glowing next to me would have the temperature back to shirt-sleeve comfort soon enough. Outside, I could hear Omu snap on a pair of mag skates and shoot off toward the shore. I was surprised that Riho had changed her mind about joining me on the ice. The alien had been terrified of the thought of frozen water. She also hated the frigid weather and had remained snugly back on shore next to the wood stove in my cottage. Maybe I'd been out here long enough without falling through the ice that she'd decided to risk it. The bobber in the bait hole began twitching steadily as the minnow below became active again. I focused on my jigging, hoping something catchable was entering the area. I'd give it another half hour before resorting to using sensor data to aid my efforts. 10 minutes later, I heard Riho and Omu approaching the shack. I smiled as I heard Omu talking steadily, reassuring Riho with reports of adequate average ice thicknesses and load-bearing capacities. I even overheard things that I had not been aware of, about the dormant underwater mobile unit that was on standby nearby, with breathing gear in case one of us did fall through. Again, I covered my eyes as the shack's flap was unsealed. "John, are you sure this is safe? Please help me in," Riho exclaimed from the opening. This time I did laugh out loud at the sight of the distressed ambassador. Riho was wearing a thick, insulated, pale white camouflage snowsuit that looked far too much like a big white grub. I wondered if she realized that she now resembled the larval hemru form. I was spared having to rise from the ice as Omu slid in nimbly beside her and assisted the cocooned alien inside the tight flap opening. "John, the frozen water is cracking!" the panicky alien exclaimed as a long series of pops and booms reverberated across the freezing ice of the lake. "Relax, Ambassador. Everything's all right," I said soothingly. I used her professional title as it sometimes fortified her when she was apprehensive about something. The ice makes noises like that as it freezes and expands. It's actually getting stronger. She looked at me as if wondering whether or not to believe my explanation. Seriously, we're safe. It sounds pretty cool if you ask me, I reassured. I do not understand how you can hear temperatures, John. It sounds like an imminent fracture failure to me. Omu had resealed the dome flap and the interior was again dark. As Riho's eyes adjusted, she took in the interior of the darkened ice shack, noting approvingly the warm glowing heating cube. Her mouth opened slightly in wonder as she looked down and noticed the almost glowing blue translucent ice we were standing on. Omu reports that thus far you have been unsuccessful in your fishing endeavor, she said, gesturing to the holes in the ice. It won't be long, I stated confidently. Have a seat. I pointed at the one stool we brought. I was currently kneeling next to my jigging hole on a small padded mat so I could peer into the hole and watch the depths. Over the next few minutes, Riho learned about ice fishing. I explained the bait hole, Omu's scanner, and the reason for my jigging setup. I even convinced her to get close enough to one of the holes to look directly downward. "Oh, I can see the bottom. What is that white substance?" she asked. Small white ceramic flakes. In the old days, I would have used oyster shells. Ice fishermen drop light-colored objects into their holes to make a reflective bottom. It helps visibility, so you can see when a dark fish swims near your lure. She watched me in silence as I returned to focusing on my jigging for the next few minutes. "John, where did the bait bobber go?" Riho asked, bringing me back out of my trance. I looked over. "Shit," I muttered as I dove, just catching the end of the bait rod that was about to be pulled into the hole. I managed to get a good grip on the short rod and gave it a quick jerk. Fish on. The short, unbreakable, woven graphene pole bent almost double as I applied maximum pressure. The fish was a big one, probably a pike. The small reel attached to the pole whined as the drag began slipping out line. Not so much to protect the ultra-high-strength braided carbon line, but more so to prevent the sharp hooks from being pulled through the lip of the fish. "Oh, Moo, is the hole big enough?" I asked. "If you are successful in bringing the specimen to the underside of the ice perforation, it should fit through easily." "Is it a pike?" I asked, ignoring my friend's implied warning to not count my chickens before they hatch. "Yes, it is a fine example of Esox lucius. Sensor data shows the specimen at 96 centimeters long and massing at around 5.8 kilograms. I confirm that its girth will easily pass through the current perforation in the ice." I continued to fight the fish, which felt much larger than 6 kilos. I was being patient as I really wanted to land it and prove the android had underestimated its size. I looked over and smiled. Riho was watching with rapt attention, almost apprehension. She looked ready to bolt as the screaming drag on the reel only ratcheted up the tension. I almost made a bad joke by telling Omu to have the medical gear standing by, but wisely decided to spare the already near-panicked ambassador further turmoil. I fought the fish for another minute before its limited winter energy reserves were sapped. Once its head was visible in the hole, I carefully reached into the icy water and grabbed its toothy lip with my armor-gloved hand. Omu had been right. It did fit up through the ice hole, but barely. It also seemed to keep coming and coming, momentarily increasing my excitement, but eventually the tail emerged. I stood with the long pike completely out of the water and saw that it was just under a meter long. Its heft felt around 6 kilos as well. Omu's scanning had been precise. I turned to present the pike to Riho. "Oh, it's one of the lake's aquatic denizens." "What did you expect?" I almost snorted. "You've seen me catch fish before, Zeotile. You've even seen me catch them from this very lake." "Well, yes, John," she replied with a bit of a huff, "but I've never seen you catch anything through the ice like this." I just laughed and shook my head. That the alien could say something so illogical at times actually reassured me about the future of human/Hemru relations. Riho caught my expression and looked chagrined as her brain got control of her emotional reaction. "Well, yes, I see your point. I may have overreacted." I proudly held up the pike a bit higher, using my other arm for additional support as it seemed to be getting heavier fast. Necessist. While it wasn't the brace of perch I'd been hoping for, this large pike would provide fare for many meals. "I am interfacing with the specimen's implanted tracker and data implant," Omu explained as she stood and carefully began to the hook from the pike's jaw. "It has the designation Jap Parbs 10,201, 030.0502, 3,099. But you can call her Japar. Japper? I asked curiously. She has a name? Yes, the designation refers to John Abrams Prime. Private Aquatic Reserve, Omu explained. The numbers after refer to the batch number, rearing group, and the date of stocking. The android had finally gotten the hook out and then relieved me of its weight by taking the fish carefully by the mouth. This line of pike was genetically modified to do well in the waters of your North American acreage reserve. The implant contains 18 years of active data. You might be interested to know that this specimen is currently the 14th largest predator in this body of water and the lake's 22nd oldest resident. I frowned. Thanks, Omu. I looked at the beautiful, long predator with new eyes. This old girl had a name? She was also far older than I'd expected. Well, now we know why the perch have not been biting. Shall I place it outside to freeze? Omu asked. I began hesitating. No, Omu, let's let this one go. It's far too big for our supper anyway. Ambassador, please move closer to John, Omu directed. Riho did so curiously, although she kept my body between herself and the two larger ice holes. I reached around her insulated snowsuit and hugged her close. The android then deployed a tiny floating ball cam and moved to my other side, holding the pike in front of us. The hovering object began flashing, and there was an audible click as it imaged the group. After the picture-taking was finished, we backed away from the larger hole as Omu carefully eased the long, heavy pike back into the water. The android then knelt and, still retaining her hold on the fish, stuck her arm fully in the water. She then gently maneuvered the exhausted fish back and forth, causing oxygenated water to pass over its gills in an attempt to revive it. After continuing this for nearly a half minute, the android released the pike and stood. The scanners are tracking the pike as it swims away. It should fully recover. I sighed with relief. What a big softy I was becoming. But like I'd said, the pike would have been too much for supper. I sensed that Riho had been pleased with my decision as well. While the alien ate meat, I knew that she preferred it to be artificially produced whenever possible. Hopefully that pike keeps swimming out of the area and a school of walleye or perch move in to take its place. Do you want me to locate suitable schools using an underwater drone? Omu asked. No, I replied. I'm fishing today, not underwater hunting. I'd used more technological methods before, and while I had to admit they were pretty exciting, today I was in the mood for something more traditional. Maybe it was Riho's presence? You want to try ice fishing? I asked the alien. Riho leaned slightly forward, studying the placid hole in the ice. After a moment, she shuddered and shook her head firmly no. No, thank you, John. After watching you land that fish, I feel I now have a firm understanding of your endeavors today. I think I will leave you to your pursuits if that is okay. Omu, will you assist me in returning to the cottage? That's fine, Riho. I'm happy that you braved the ice to come see as you did. Thank you. I also wanted to let you know that I have been in contact with Beatrice. I frowned at being reminded of the scientist. The main reason I'd gone fishing today was to get Beatrice's recent tirade out of my mind. She'd not taken her death in New Shell as well as I'd hoped, and this morning there had been a confrontation. I think part of it was being in a new young shell filled with too many long-forgotten hormones. She admitted that she may have been too hard on you. She realizes that her death and loss of memory had not been your fault, and that you did not owe her physical companionship at this time. She wanted to apologize for trying to force herself on you. If you talk to her again, tell her that everything is fine, I replied calmly. It was not fine. If Beatrice wanted to apologize, then she damn well could have contacted me and done so to me directly. I think Riho caught that I was still upset as she dropped the subject and departed with Omu. I stepped outside with them to cool off. Omu had brought the sled and was pulling the alien quickly across the ice and back to shore. After relieving myself and getting back inside the shack where it was warm, I put all thoughts of Beatrice out of mind by rebaiting the minnow on the line on which I'd caught the pike. Soon I was busy with my jig, the simple repetitive task cleansing the hurt from my soul. About an hour after Riho's departure, I did manage to catch enough fish for supper. As I had hoped, a school of perch wandered into the area below the shack, and I managed to catch 4 nice-sized panfish before calling an end to the expedition. Omu and I quickly packed up our gear, and now we stood waiting on the bare open ice. Despite the abnormally cold day, I was cozy in my sealed and heated parka and leggings. With the sunset looming, Omu had called for an automated snow scooter to pick us up on the ice, saving me the 200-meter trek back to the stone jetty by the cottage. With not even the tiniest trace of wind, it was dead silent on the ice. The only movement was the rising steam from my breath. This was mirrored on shore by the smoke rising in a perfect vertical column from the stone chimney of my cottage. The tranquil setting was reflective, and I thought back over the 3 days since we'd arrived at my old acreage. It had been an abnormally cold winter thus far, and my upper high prairie acreage had seen daily temperatures which topped out only at -10 Celsius each day we'd been here. Even with the cold, there were still historical tourists coming and going. Last night, we'd been forced to stay at the cottage as a small group had reserved my main farmhouse for a winter overnight. This morning, after a fitful sleep caused by Beatrice's leaving the night before, I'd finally had enough of being cooped up in the small cottage and had arranged the ice fishing venture. It had been a wise choice, as now I felt at peace. Last night, I'd almost had Naomi Wormhole poke us to heels and flee this icebox, but now I was glad I'd stuck around. There was a unique, serene beauty here, and I marveled at the setting sun. With the long axis of the ice-covered lake aligned roughly towards the southwest, my current vantage and the tree-covered shoreline to each side framed the solar display like a portrait. Adding to the magic, the extreme cold had caused ice crystals to form in the air. These bright solar paralia, more commonly known as sundogs, bracketed the sun almost as if 3 suns were setting in a row. I had Omu use her imager to capture the amazing scene. The snow scooter arrived and we loaded up. As the guests who had reserved it last night were now long gone, we were traveling back to the main farmhouse tonight instead of remaining in the cottage. Omu had signaled ahead to Riho that we were on our way, so once we reached the shore, she was already bundled up and waiting. Supper that night was delicious. Fried breaded fish and hush puppies. Even Riho had a second helping, although it was heavy on the puppies. Dessert was a hot apple cobbler and coffee. After washing up, the ambassador headed to the media room to enter virtuality. She was hosting hemorrhoology lectures nearly every day and had an additional session scheduled for tonight. I planned to use the 3 hours of solitude to reread an old favorite novel. Instead, the book lay unopened as today's ice fishing adventure had dredged up memories from long ago. I simply sat in the darkened room, lit only by the flickering fireplace, and let myself bask in recollections from the past. Outside, the view through my insulated farmhouse window showed that the night had indeed dropped to record lows. It was a new moon, and in the blackness, the stars were like crisp diamonds. I never tired of the heavenly display, helped by this new world's lack of either light or air pollution. Even with no moon, the Milky Way was bright enough to illuminate the snow-covered prairie. I suddenly felt the urge to paint, wanting to capture the beauty of both the earlier sundog sunset and the current starlit snowfield. My implant buzzed, warning me of a pending incoming transmission and bursting my creative hopes for the evening. "Hello, John. I apologize for disturbing your contemplative evening." Naomi rarely contacted me these days on its own. My first thought was to worry. "No problem, Naomi. What's wrong?" I said out loud, not bothering to sub-vocalize. "I sense that you have sufficiently recovered from both the events on Phobos and the death drama of Miss Iovianu to now engage in a discussion of our future plans." I was silent for a moment, considering the AI's statement. I was irked that the AI had considered me to be too mentally affected to discuss what needed discussing. But of all the AIs, Naomi spent her existence focused on me before anything else, so I had to give her the benefit of doubt. Yes, I had been bothered by both events, and I had to admit that recently I'd begun to feel better. The simple outlet of my fishing adventure today had helped immensely. "You're probably right. What's on your mind?" So, despite the risk, I have supported what has been built thus far in Vesta. It offers a unique fallback response should the enemy deploy unforeseen resources. The AI was referring to acid rain, our weaponized runaway super-sentient genie in a bottle. I also support the potential use of that resource offensively against the enemy if a sufficiently low-risk method of deployment can be found. Now the AI was referring to the stinger we'd added to Sarissa, the ultra-high bandwidth bit of hardware that would project acid rain into the heart of the enemy's information net, if we could figure out a way to safely and accurately deploy it. I wish to discuss the idea proposed by Miss Crather and your son regarding the use of orator deception vessel. Have you spoken with them on this already? I asked, curious if what we were discussing was meant for the others also. Yes, but in generalities only, and not the exact details I wish to discuss with you now. They are currently sleeping, but I predict they would be agreeable to joining into a joint virtuality, now if you wish it. No, that's fine. What have you come up with? 2 items. First, I have deduced an alternative and perhaps safer method of baiting the deception vessel instead of offering the enemy wormhole technology. Second, you may remember that recently I mentioned that I have initiated special iterations of the simulated reality project, which utilize the Picket persona. Yeah, I never got to follow up on that. What gives? I asked, suddenly remembering that Naomi had mentioned this back when I'd still been on Mars. In order to foster a believable scenario for such a raider deception ship, I have created iterations where the Picket persona and the master AI continue to dominate this solar system. In addition, in these iterations, new technologies have been developed, very similar to those developed in reality by Uxe Esperanza. Okay, I replied questioningly. We'd been planning on baiting our trap with wormhole technology. It sounds like you've been creating iterations along those lines. What safer form of bait have you come up with? I propose to offer the assemblage a superluminal space drive. Wow, Naomi, you had better wake up Alec and Hannah and set us up in virtual. Is Ux available? Yes, she says she can attend, preparing the low-fidelity virtual meeting room now. I set my teacup on the nightstand and laid my head back. In moments, the room faded as my conscience slipped down a digital pathway. Almost instantly, I found myself on the virtual sail bridge of Naomi's submarine Corencia. In this virtuality, the sub was resting still on the surface of a placid, endless ocean. It was night, and fantastical stars filled the sky, along with ringed golden planets and silently flaming comets. Also, the fantasy bridge I was standing on was many times larger and more comfortably appointed than the real thing. Centered in the open area was a large, half-circle conference table. There were 5 comfortably upholstered chairs, spaced evening along the curved edge of the table. Omu's virtual avatar, looking as spectacular as always, was already seated in the middle position. She smiled and waved me over. Before I could approach, 2 other avatars, Alec and Hannah, materialized beside the far pair of chairs. They were facing each other, with Hannah speaking. It looked like they were in the middle of an ongoing discussion. Hannah's avatar was also holding a mug of steaming coffee. I understood this symbolism to mean that they had already been active for a short time in accelerated virtual. The additional time in coffee likely allowing them to mentally wake up in a more natural manner from their interrupted sleep. It was a nice gesture, and I appreciated Naomi sparing me the time while they got up to speed. Hannah stopped speaking as they realized that they were now in my presence. Alec nodded toward me as they moved to take the pair of seats next to them. Ux popped into the scene next to me. I almost took a step back when I noticed that she'd changed her virtual appearance. Instead of some version of the familiar female shell I'd married, she was now in the waif-like shell she'd possessed when I had first met her in the jungles of Peru almost 2 centuries ago. She smiled once she became cognizant of her surroundings and opened her arms to greet me. Ux, what the hell are you doing looking like this? I exclaimed, stepping forward to return her embrace. I'd had to stoop to do so. Her current small form reminded me of hugging one of my children when they were young. I was shocked to see her using this virtual image, as Ux had hated everything about her original master AI-created body. I like to wear it briefly every few decades, John. It's sort of a reminder of where I came from and how far I've moved on. Mother, I don't know what to say, Alex said, his mouth hanging open. Hannah also looked shocked but remained silent. All right, honey, you're freaking out the children. And me. Would you mind switching to anything else? I implored. Oh, all right, Naomi, if you will, Ux said. Her image morphed into her typical virtual form. I nodded in thanks to her concession. We could have adjusted our sense filters to see her however we wished, but it was better to have us all on the same page. I assisted Ux into her seat and then took my own. Naomi appeared in the center of the table as a small potted sunflower. The flower spoke. Jon asked you here so that I could brief the entire group on my proposal to further develop the Raider Deception vessel option for use against the assemblage arc. A large wood-framed green chalkboard appeared floating in space beyond the flat side of the half-circle table. A chalk diagram of a large rocket-like object appeared. In some ways, it resembled the Higgins landing craft Hannah and Alec had built back in Martian orbital space. But unlike that boxy and utilitarian object, this one was almost streamlined. It also had two nacelles on short arms at its base. "Behold my deception inception," Naomi stated. We smiled at one another at the AI's quip. We'll have to work on the name," I replied while chuckling, "and it looks familiar for some reason." "It's from a Star Trek movie," Hannah exclaimed. "The one where they went back to old Earth to find that guy building the first warp ship out of an old ICBM. I recall it also," Ux added, "Zefram Cochrane's patchwork ship that caught the eye of the passing Vulcans." Now I remembered. I'd gotten Ux hooked on my favorite old science fiction shows back when we were first married, so was not surprised that she remembered. I'd forgotten that Hannah had also been a bit of a sci-fi fan when she had been a little girl back before the reset. Alec just looked confused, but kept silent. "Our Trojan horse is going to be the first Star Trek warp drive ship?" I asked, trying to understand. "Did you invent a warp drive, Naomi? If the AI had done that, I certainly would not want to give it to the enemy." "Unfortunately, no," the animated centerpiece of Naomi's avatar said. "Although I am intrigued by the new possibilities toward that, which Uxie and Rami are exploring with his fledgling work on Fort Palace. There is a decent chance that a working superluminal drive will result from their work, although not in the short term. But having a working warp drive is not a requirement when using deception. You want to build a pretend starship and send it to the vicinity of the Ark using a wormhole," Hannah said. "That is correct," Naomi replied. "Simply by arriving in the Ark's vicinity and transmitting known assemblage codes proving an earthly origin, the deception vessel would convince the assemblage controlling intelligence that superluminal travel technology exists." "But," I began, before pausing a moment to finish formulating my question, "won't the assemblage quickly learn that the starship is a fake? And even before that, won't they be cautious of a decoy, maybe a hidden bomb, and keep the raider ship far away until it can be scanned as safe and the technology real? We can't deploy acid rain or use the Stinger unless we can physically connect with the enemy's data net." "All true, Jon," Naomi agreed. "But consider three key points. The first is that the deception ship will appear near the Ark without having been detected decelerating. This would only be the case if it did actually arrive using an unknown faster-than-light form of propulsion. The second point is that we will attempt to build into the deception ship a reasonable facsimile of a working hyperdrive. This facsimile should be robust enough to fool any intelligence level of a capacity at which we estimate controls the Ark." The AI was losing me. How the hell could we build a reasonable facsimile of something that we had as of yet not invented? I asked the AI just that. Ux looked thoughtful and answered instead of Naomi. "We could build a fake hyperdrive-like engine using exotic matter cycling through spatial disruption coils, just like we use in the wormhole portal machines." "Yes, that is my hypothesis, Uxie," Naomi agreed. "Both the exotic matter and the disruption coils would be unknown technologies to the enemy, or if they do have knowledge of each, they lack the energy and/or the capability to produce and utilize either, as we do. Regardless, to the assemblage intelligence, it will seem like a valid hyperdrive method." Hannah, Alec, and I were bystanders, watching Uxa's techno-babble interaction with the AI with amazement. Naomi continued, "To simulate such an engine would be to utilize both the exotic matter and the disruption coils in an opposite fashion as we do currently to perforate space. Thus we deceive the enemy while leading them down a blind alley, technology-wise, that should preserve our exclusive knowledge of spatial rift projection." I see what you mean, Naomi, Ux agreed. The fake hyperdrive would be like running a wormhole generator in reverse, moving the generator itself through subspace instead of puncturing a rift. Variations of this theory have existed for millennia, even before the reset, but we know that it would take near infinite energy and would never work. The enemy will have seen it work by the fact that the deception ship arrived on their doorstep, and by abductive reasoning, it thusly would conclude that the hyperdrive is functional, the AI stated. What's the third key point, Naomi? Alec asked. I would advise that we send along someone the assemblage trusts who can vouch for both the deception ship and its alleged technology, the AI explained. The new iterations hacked it, I exclaimed. You want to send Pickett back to its makers? That is correct, John, Naomi replied. What's this? Ux asked. I have recently utilized the Simulated Reality Project to develop new iterations of Earth's past, present, and future, the AI explained. In these iterations, Pickett's arrival in system corresponds with the master AI reaching total supremacy over a small rebellious element of feral humans. I have developed various scenarios where before being crushed, the feral elements had dabbled with mental hybridization to the extent that new and unlikely science advancements had been achieved, the most notable of these being the discovery of a viable hyperspace drive. And we send this Pickett back to the Ark in the Raider ship, Alec exclaimed. It will help prove that some method of FTL travel exists, as his digital data will have only been sent from the Ark just over 9 years ago. Far too short for the 18 years, plus a round trip would have taken at light speed. Correct, Alec, Naomi replied. Again, the principle of parsimony would have the assemblage believe that the craft which delivered their agent could have only done so by traveling faster than the speed of light. Add to that the sound logic that their agent in control of Sol's system would be eager to return, if only to share this new technological marvel with its progenitor. But even with Pickett on board, won't the assemblage quickly realize that the warp drive on the ship doesn't work? Hannah asked. What if they try a demonstration flight? Maybe we could just have the Raider ship that reaches the Ark be just a final stage or something, I added. What if the star drive portion had to be dropped off because of some danger? Yeah, Dad, Alec added. Maybe. What if the Raider ship dropped off the star drive section early to keep it safe, so that it could verify that the assemblage Ark is uncompromised? Excellent suggestions, Naomi said. Having a human point of view opens up many additional methods of subterfuge. I frowned at the possible shot the AI had taken at humanity. Omu caught my reaction. Be proud of your kin, John. Subterfuge and deception are key elements of survival in the natural order. Even if they buy the idea that the star drive portion of the Raider ship is dropped off early, the assemblage will still expect the full details of the working hyperspace to be stored in the encrypted data archives of the part of the vessel that did arrive, Ux stated, looking thoughtful. She then perked up. Naomi, do we have encryption methods that can withstand the estimated total potential processing capacity of the assemblage? There was a long silence. The virtuality background around us froze. I looked at my companion avatars to see if they were still present and active. They were, and were looking around puzzled, just like I was. Naomi, I said. The AI is processing Uxi's question, Omu replied. Let's give it a bit of time to finish. Without the full power of the AI Advisory Council, answering such a question is formidable. Does Naomi fear to include the other AIs? Alec asked. Not precisely, Alec. Naomi and I, for that matter, have the override authority to compel compliance from the other AIs. This would include keeping all knowledge of what is being processed from greater humanity. But at this time, all AIs in the system are busy helping with the repair and upgrades ongoing in the Martian system. Before anyone could comment, the virtuality background became animated once again and the potted sunflower centerpiece spoke. I have completed a thorough review of the estimated capabilities of the enemy artificial intelligence network. Naomi paused for a moment before continuing. Note, this estimate includes using an advanced encryption method derived from the so far uncompromised fourth data module extracted from the Forbin experiment 4 years ago. I remembered that data module. It was the one that we'd left buried in a welded copper sarcophagus deep under the lunar far side. We'd given up trying to decrypt the module's secrets after all attempts to probe it burned out whatever intelligence was making the attempt. I did not authorize anyone to dig up that module, Naomi, I interrupted. It remains safely in confinement, Jon, Naomi explained. I refer to what was learned before the module was sealed away. Oh, I misunderstood. Hannah and Alec looked confused. They were unaware of much of our success and failures at exploiting the knowledge we'd learned from the dangerous experiment I dared run at the Forbin complex. Naomi continued, thus, using the most advanced encryption in our possession, and by extrapolating the total processing power, which the assemblage would risk devoting to a decryption effort, I estimate a time frame between 60.2 to 88.4 hours. So there is a possibility that as soon as 2.5 days after the raider ship arrives, the enemy will have broken any encryption and learned that the hyperdrive data is a hoax, I said. That is a possibility, Jon, Naomi admitted. But before that, how would they go about breaking such encryption, Jon? Naomi asked. Well, they could never do it by radio, I stated, even if they used laser comms, and they would not be able to transport enough computing power out to the raider ship in a parking orbit beyond the Ark to do the job. I was distracted by Ux suddenly sitting back. Her avatar had an almost feral grin on its face. Son of a bitch, that was it! They could only attempt to break a Forbin-level encryption by directly linking their main processor network to it. They would have to pull the raider ship in close to wherever their main computing center was and directly couple to it, I exclaimed. Precisely, Jon, Naomi replied. And once they link their main processor net to our hardware whose location we can actively and precisely track using neutrino pulses, it will be possible to safely deploy the Stinger and initiate acid rain. The discussions went on for another half hour as details and plans were considered. The rough concept was confirmed. We'd build a Trojan horse and bait it with the false secrets of hyperdrive. The data would be a trap, and once the enemy bit, the trap would spring and sting it, hopefully to death. The last item to be discussed was the most important. So, do we dare try this? Alec asked. There was silence with all the human avatars looking contemplative. We'd discussed this question many times in the past with mixed feelings. It looked like we all still had mixed feelings. Naomi, what is your consensus? Advisory group in singular, I asked. The AI Advisory Council advises patience, Jon, as do I, Naomi replied instantly. At present, the substantial risks in deploying the Raider concept, as well as simply activating the acid rain installation itself, are immense. I advise that it remain as it was originally conceived, as a standby weapon of last resort. But it could end the war in an instant, Hannah said, and save years, maybe decades of resource-consuming effort. I am aware of the resources devoted to the current military offensive, Hannah, Naomi replied calmly. While considerable, they remain known and manageable. Naomi, assuming we decide not to use acid rain, I asked, are we assured victory simply by continuing with our current attack methods? I estimate that humanity will eventually prevail, Jon. I must also point out that as the conventional attacks continue, the enemy will grow ever more suspicious. The Raider deception ship concept may become infeasible, as it will be too likely that Earth is the source of the continuing attacks. Similarly, it is likely that the enemy will soon deduce that our weapons are arriving in an unconventional manner. If the assemblage AI deduces the existence of our wormholes, is it smart enough to reverse engineer the theory behind them? Ux asked. Uncertain at this time, Naomi admitted. But with evidence that an impossibility is possible, it becomes easy to devote extraordinary resources to the problem. I knew enough history to understand that this had been proven true many times in the past. All right, I said with finality. We've discussed this to death and have come up with great ideas for the Raider ship and for future discussion. I want to go ahead and start building the hardware at the High Castle automated shipyard. You can all help as needed via virtuality. How long do you think construction will take, Naomi? 16 to 19 days, Jon, the AI replied. Depending upon how many revisions, all of the required materials are available or easily sourced on the surface of the moon. Thank you. While the hardware is being built, we can meet again to flesh out the deception methods. I'd also like to observe this new picket active in its iteration. Can you arrange that? Yes, Jon. Dionys AI will provide access that matches the iteration. Do you wish Kella to remain unaware of the new iterations? Naomi asked. I looked at Ux, who shook her head slowly. Kella was in a relationship with the version of Pickett that we had downloaded into a living shell. I was glad that her mother agreed with me in not wanting to subject our daughter to other versions when we could avoid it. Let's keep Kayla out of this if we can, I replied. Of course, John, the AI replied. I turned back to face the other avatars. One last thing. Give me a yes or no on whether you think we should try the deception option and possibly utilize acid rain as soon as possible. Hannah voted yes instantly. Alec voted no. Ux voted no also, but qualified her vote by explaining that she wanted to see what was built first. Omu just smiled. I'd have a lot to think about over the next months.